Alright, I'm going to try and make a video summarizing all of the cooling system saga that I went through. There's probably 3 or 4 videos posted on YouTube. I've got probably close to 16 hours of footage since then. This cooling system kicked my butt from mid-February to early June. And so it was a combination of things. It was some things I'd done wrong. It was some things I didn't understand about doing mid-engine cars. It was some things that are problematic on Subarus that are excavated, made worse when you put a Subaru in a mid-engine setup. So the first issue I had obviously was just flat out overheating. I couldn't do anything I needed to do with the car because it was always overheating. I couldn't take it to the alignment shop. I couldn't take it out and drive it. I couldn't take it to the track. I couldn't do anything because it was overheating. And everybody kept telling me I had air in the system, and I didn't believe them because I thought, surely I've got all the air out of the system. Surely I've done everything I need to do to get the air out of the system. I took the front end of the car and I used an engine hoist, and I picked it up over my head, over 6 foot in the air, so that the inlet to the radiator here was definitely the highest point in the system. And I filled it and I ran it while it was up in the air like that, and I could see all the air coming out of it, and I would top it off, and still I would have problems with it overheating. The biggest problem I would have is that the thermostat would never open. The thermostat is down here. It's actually at the inlet to the water pump instead of the outlet like most old school cars like I've worked on, but this appears to be fairly common in modern cars. And what it does is it relies on a loop to come back and heat the thermostat up. So the engine's getting hot. There is a loop that's under all this that you can't see that comes out of the manifold and runs back down to the thermostat. And then the heater core supply goes to the heater core and comes back, and it also returns to the thermostat. So both of those loops are supposed to be heating up the thermostat and getting it to open. And I couldn't get mine to open. And I thought for sure I had a bad water pump because I thought for sure all the air's out of the system. And so I started doing crazy things. First thing I did was I pulled the thermostat out, and it would run fine with no thermostat in it. So once again, I thought, if there was air in the system, it shouldn't work with a thermostat gone, so it's not an air issue. It is, I've got a bad water pump that just doesn't have enough head to overcome, not having the thermostat open and access to full flow. So I drilled a bunch of holes in my thermostat and put it back in, and the engine worked okay. But then I couldn't get any hot water to the heater core. No matter how hot the engine was, even though it was not running hot, it was cooling properly like it was supposed to, couldn't get any hot air out of my heater core. So then I went through another problem of trying to figure out how to get the air out of the heater core, because I figured that really was an air issue. So I actually added a second fill port right here because I was using a system that pulled vacuum on the system and then sucked the water or the coolant in through a vacuum. And by putting it in up front at the radiator, it had to go through the high side of the radiator to get to the engine side of everything, because the low point was dead-ended or blocked by the thermostat. So I put a fill port here that gave me access to the engine without having to go through the thermostat, and to the heater core without having to go to the thermostat. And it's not there anymore, but there was a T running out the bottom of that into the heater line to try and get it to pull a vacuum on the heater core and the engine block and fill both of those with water. And then if it didn't completely fill up the radiator, that wasn't a big deal, because all I had to fill up was this line here, the radiator to the inlet to the thermostat. And so I thought that would solve my problem, but it still didn't solve my problem. All right, little camera issue, but hopefully we're back. So yeah, putting a second port over there, trying to fill the block and heater core as one, and then fill the radiator and the feed line here as another one. Still didn't help. And I was really at my wit's end, man. I'd like literally typed up a Craigslist ad, show up with a truck and it's yours for free. I'm just sick of looking at it. I was months in, and I was at my wit's end with this thing. And finally, one of the guys on the forums, he gave me a call and he talked to me. He said, look, you know, on a mid-engine car, you're never going to get all of the air out on the first fill. It's just not going to happen. You've got to have a way for the air to work itself out. There's too much pipe, there's too much hose, there's too much elevation change. You've got your radiator, and then you go down into your supply and returns, and then you come back up into your engine, right? And so he talked to me about building a system of air escape lines. And so that is what I went back and did. First of all, this is a blanking cap on the radiator, which means it is 0 psi, or a million psi, I guess. 0 psi. It has no spring in it. If I open it up there, you can see it's just flat. It seals it off, and it's always open to the vent. And so this line here, I hope I got that back on right, is just a 5/16 line, but it's got what they call a pill in it. It's basically got a piece of tubing in it that fills up. You can, I might be able to bend it around. You can't see it, but it's solid. It's snug inside the line, and it's got an 1/8 hole in it. So a lot of water can't pass through that line because there's only an 1/8 hole, but the air passes through fairly easily. So I've got one here. It gets any air that might be in the radiator end of the system. I had this extra fill port I'd already installed, so I took one off of there. Same thing, it's got the pill in it, and that's where the line from the front ties into that Y. So air can come out of both of those, the radiator or the engine block, and then it comes up here, and we've got another Y where one end goes into the degas tank, which, hint, hint, degas is for getting air out. And the other end here runs over to the heater line so that any air that's in the heater circuit can come out this way. Same thing, it's got a 1/8 pill in it. And all those come into the degas tank. And then from there, the degas tank goes over to the overfill tank, which I never had installed. The last car I built was a 65 Mustang. You have a puke bag is all you have. You don't have this overflow tank here, because all of the burping and all that, you just do it when you fill the car up, pull the radiator cap off, let it burp, put it back on. But apparently these Subarus really need this, and what happens is this hose goes all the way to the bottom so that it can spit water into here and then suck water out of here. But it also gets all the air out through here. So all the air builds up in the degas tank, builds pressure, the vent pops, it comes over here, the air bubbles up through the water and out, and then it sucks more water in from here to replace the air that came out. So, and that mostly solved the issue. I still have an issue where I don't get a lot of hot water up to my heater core at idle. If I just rev it up to about 1200 RPM, I start getting hot air out of the heater. But at 700 RPM, not so much. And I've pulled these lines off and I've watched them run, and there's just not a lot of flow through here when you're at idle. And so I don't know if that's common to Subarus. My guess is it's not a big deal on a Subaru, because normally it comes out of the block right here and the heater core's right here, right? It doesn't have to go all the way up there and all the way back. I don't really need a heater. I live in Houston. We have like 5 days a year where it gets below 45 degrees, so it's not a big deal. But I wanted it there in case I ever sell the car to somebody who does need a heater. But that finally solved the issue, was the air bleed lines and the degas tank. Now, it's possible I didn't need this system of bleeder lines that come off the heater core and off the block and off the radiator. It's possible all I really needed was a proper overflow tank so that the degas tank could bubble air over here and suck water back in. I just had that overflow line capped off. I was going to install it one day. I just didn't need it on my last engine, didn't think I needed it here, and I was trying to keep things simple while I was troubleshooting. So that's really it. You know, I think I learned a whole lot of lessons from this about a mid-engine car, right? Your radiator is usually lower than your engine, and so that creates issues. You have the big elevation changes from your supply and return lines to your radiator and your engine, plus your heater core if you've got one of those. And so you really got to make sure you've got a way for air to get out. You're never going to get all the air out, best I can tell. I mean, I've heard people say they do it, they design systems, but when you start talking to guys who race this thing, they all talk about air bleed lines. Some guys I've seen, they have they don't bring them all back to a degas tank, but they have little valves sticking up everywhere where they just open them up a little bit and let the air bubble out until they see water flowing, and then they close it off and they go back, and they've got a couple of those spread around the car. But the big thing is you got to have a way to let the air work its way out, because these systems with all their elevation changes and different compartments of radiator, engine block, heater core, degas tank, even using one of those really good vacuum systems, I mean, I pulled 30 mils of vacuum on this thing, and it held for 5 minutes, and I still couldn't get a complete fill that way. I still had air in the system that had to work its way out. So that's where I wound up after months and months of totally getting my butt kicked. I have a cooling system that works now. And so I moved on to some other things. I'm focusing on suspension right now. This video is fixing to get posted, wrapping up the cooling. Hopefully in the next 2 weeks, I'll get another video up focusing on all the suspension. And then we're going to be going into body work. So before I go into body work, we'll get a video up going over some of the renderings, some of the concepts, some of my goals and visions, and how I'm going to get there. So I know updates have gotten slow. That's because I didn't want to just keep showing you guys me beating my head against the wall. I mean, I guess some of you guys might like watching people suffer in agony and want to stab themselves with steely knives that burn with fire, but I decided to not put all that out. I just decided that I was going to have to wait until I was done to make a summary video. So, summary video, here it is on the cooling system. We'll do one on the suspension, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll be on the body work.